My name is Brian Chapman. I'm the Executive Director of the Clark Fork Coalition, and I'd like to welcome you all here to the introduction and to kickoff meeting for the Central Clark Fork Watershed Restoration Planning Process. I feel like that just needs a round of applause. The process was started back in 2020 by our very own Dr. Watson. 2017, we're just gonna go with 2020 because that's the draft we had. But it took you 3 years to get there. So by Dr. Watson, and due to a variety of world events that occurred between 2020 and 2017, there was some capacity challenges of getting that finished or submitted to the DEQ. And so with some generous financial and other logistical support from Dr. Watson and from the Western Montana Conservation Commission, Clark Fork Coalition has retaken up the effort of organizing the stakeholders, facilitating some conversations around the watershed restoration plan and getting that submitted so that we can have it approved one here in the Central Clark Fork. You'll hear more about watershed restoration planning in a minute. I have some logistics to start with. So we're going to be here in this setting for about 45 minutes. We're going to hear a presentation about kind of the history leading up to this part and some of what's next and what that'll all look like. And then we're going to facilitate some kind of group discussions around the room to bring some potential projects and to capitalize on the wealth of knowledge in this room and to bring that to the planning process. For now, restrooms are in the hall back there, up next, or the hall that has the sign out that says restroom. Snacks are in the corner over here, strategically located so you can get out of your seat and get some snacks at any time to keep yourself fueled on this Friday afternoon. In the back of the room, center, is a cooler full of cold beverages, alcoholic and non, and feel free to partake in that throughout the meeting. And we have to thank a few people for that. Bitterroot Brewery, or Bitterroot Brewing, donated the alcoholic beverages in there, thanks to them. Clark Fork Coalition, we provided the snacks and the non-alcoholic beverages, and we want to thank the Confluence Center for providing the space, not only to us and for this event, but for nonprofit activity and community events all year long. This is a fantastic space, and we really want to thank the Confluence for that. While all of that is free for you today, if you're so inclined to support our work facilitating the watershed restoration plan and our work, Clark Fork Coalition's work protecting and restoring the Clark Fork River, feel free to donate at any time, and I will point out the staff members that can facilitate that even while you're in the room if you'd like. You can also do that online. I have to plug it. Come on. So speaking of the Clark Fork Coalition, I want to introduce you to some staff members that you're going to hear from today. We have Gretchen Watkins. Gretchen is one of our restoration project managers, and she is taking on facilitating the writing and submission of the Central Clark Fork Watershed Restoration Plan. So you hear a lot from Gretchen today. We have Lily Haynes. Lily Haynes is our community programs manager. Lily is one of our most public-facing staff members. I'm sure you've seen Lily around. She does a myriad of things throughout the watershed that I could talk at length about. Next to her is Jess Walter. Jess is our development director and community programs director, and she is another outward-facing member of CFC. If you haven't had the pleasure of talking to Jess about the many things that she does in a day and for the river, please go back and meet Jess. We have Chloe Sleva. Chloe is a master's student at the University of Montana, but she is also a Clark Fork Coalition intern. She's found by the Weiss Fellowship, and she is her work around the watershed restoration plan is also part of her thesis. So she's looking at the efficacy and history of watershed restoration planning generally, but then also working on this one in real time to inform her thesis. So super cool. You're going to hear from her today as well. And then we have the great pleasure of having three of our river ambassador team. Hopefully you've seen the river ambassadors around in the river, spreading goodwill and educating around keeping safely recreating up and down the urban river corridor and beyond. We have McKenna Flanagan, Ellen Davis, and Kit Fisher with us. And last but certainly not least, we have Emily McGurk. And Emily is our monitoring and data science manager. And Emily runs up and down the watershed, managing flow or monitoring flow, managing flow a lot of times, and working with our DEQ water quality monitoring program as well. So thanks, Emily, for being here. Understand, anybody? It's a lot. Great. Okay. I needed this this sheet to keep myself on track because there's a lot going here. If you're tuning in on Zoom, thanks for being here. This is a webinar format, so you don't need to mute yourself while you're there. You're already muted. If you have questions during the process, please put those in the chat and we will get to those and answer those. If at the end of the presentation, when we're in the Q&A, you really want to speak your mind and have us to hear your voice, we can unmute you at that time and provide you with an opportunity to ask your question live. And here's what we're going to do over the next 45 minutes. As I mentioned, formal presentation about the watershed restoration planning process generally and efforts leading up to the Central Clark Fork kickoff plan meeting today. We'll take clarifying questions during this presentation. So something that Gretchen or Chloe or I have said that you'd say, wait a minute, I would love to clarify that right now. Raise your hand. Let's do that then. But if it's a bigger discussion question that's going to take us on a tangent or we want to discuss more as a whole group, let's keep that to the end just to keep us on track and not derail as much. After that, we're going to engage each other around the room in, we have 8 maps, 8 correct? So we have 8 maps of the 8 sub-basins of the Central Clark Fork watershed. And we want to utilize you all and understand the great knowledge that you have about work that's been done in these sub-basins and potential work to be or could be done in these sub-basins. So feel free, we'll introduce the activity a little bit more when we're done, but feel free to walk around, speak with one of us, write on these maps, record information, debate things, talk about it. So really, I think it's gonna be a really fun way to get as much information from this group up and out early in the process. So we're pretty excited about that. All right. Before we get started, it's very important to acknowledge that most of us live and work in the Central Clark Fork watershed. And the lands on which we live and work are the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. In our work that we do in this watershed, we try very hard to honor the path that they've chosen since time immemorial to care for the land and the water. So, and we really thank members of the Confederated Salish and Creek tribes that are joining us today, I think mostly online. I don't know if you have anyone in the room. I don't know if they were able to make it. So, but I know that some of them are online. So we really appreciate their willing participation and engagement in the process. Okay. Did I miss any logistics, Gretchen? All right. Let's get fired up. You can go to the next slide, yes.
Oh, is it? Yeah. No?
Do you try some corrections?
Hang on. Right now? There you go.
There we go. We're moving. Okay. Why a watershed restoration plan and why a watershed restoration planning process? I'm going to read a bit of a formal definition because I feel like it's a good place to start, and we can break it down from there. Watershed restoration plan in Montana is a comprehensive strategy for improving water quality and overall watershed health within a given watershed. It identifies problems, sets goals, and outlines actions to address non-point source pollution and other issues affecting water quality in a watershed. In Montana, these plans typically are developed by local groups or collaborations or collaborative efforts of stakeholders in water quality across the watershed. We set goals, identify and prioritize projects, facilitate community engagement, and we align these plans or try to align these plans with state goals. So each plan is developed and a draft of the plan is submitted to DEQ. DEQ reviews those plans, generally has some changes or things that they would like to see to align with state goals. And eventually, when those plans are approved, we can apply or groups can apply to pursue those projects that are approved in those plans with 319 funding or funding to do that. So that is, in the end, that's what a lot of folks talk about around the watershed restoration plan. But at the 10,000 foot view, this is an opportunity in the planning process to come together and say holistically across this space, what are our major priorities? What do we want to do? And what is the low hanging fruit to improve water quality? Why is the Central Clark Fork watershed important? Why are we addressing it today? I'm going to give a free drink to anybody who can answer that question. For the most important, why, Vicki, why?
Because all the rest of the basin already has one.
There isn't one.
Somebody that doesn't have one.
Somebody give Vicki Watson. She nailed it. She nailed it. There isn't one, right? There is a lack of a watershed restoration plan, an approved one in the Central Clark Fork. So that's why we're here. It's also really complex, and that could be one of the reasons that there isn't one today. The Central Clark Fork spans 3 counties It has the urban river corridor in the center of it, and it has sort of two urban river corridors if you consider the urban areas from Alberton to Superior as part of that. And so there's a myriad of interests, challenges, and stakeholders in the process. And there's a lot of work that's been completed, and there's a lot of work that still needs to be completed. So with that, I will cease my introduction and hand this to Gretchen, and she will take us through the rest of the presentation. I'll just say one more time, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited about kicking off this process. This is the code.
All right, thank you all for coming. This is a little intimidating. I know there's a lot of knowledge in here. And it's really why I kind of wanted to participate in this process. I'm relatively new to Montana. I've been here 35 years. Right, when you're new to Montana, 35 years could probably be new to Montana, right? And you hear people. So I originally was trained as like a biochemist engineer. Worked for the Forest Service out in Idaho, and then moved to northern Wisconsin and worked for a tribe doing, they hired me to write their water quality standards. And I was actually from the East Coast, and I was like, tribes? They didn't really teach us that stuff in school. And I didn't really know about like laws. I went to an engineering school. They taught me about numbers, right? And so, as I was getting into this, I was, thinking, well, I like complex things, right? And so the tribe said, we want water quality standards to protect our waters. There was a loophole in the Clean Water Act that said we will give the authority to states and tribes to manage their water quality standards. So most states were like, oh, we'll take on that authority, right? Big states, a lot of government employees, they can handle that, right? They take on that authority. Montana did that. And some tribes didn't do that. So I spent 13 years learning about the Clean Water Act. And ultimately getting to the point that we got federally approved water quality standards for this tribe. And so as part of that, as an engineer, I was like, the numbers, right? It's all just about the numbers. If the numbers make sense, then it makes sense to everybody. But unfortunately, that's not how the real world works. And sometimes numbers don't make sense to people who are like actually doing things on the landscape. And so priorities and all of those different things that we care about, right, in our landscape, making money, swimming, recreating, producing food, right? Like all those things are really important to us. And if somebody comes in and is like, how but the numbers don't make sense. Then you're like, I don't care. Right? And so here's this process. This is set out by the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act has a process to kind of figure out where are our problems and how are we ultimately going to fix them. So after working for the tribe and going through this whole crazy lawsuit and blah, 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 I ended up becoming a teacher in the high school. And I was like, that's pretty stressful. I have young children. It might be better to be a teacher. Like maybe we just need to teach the young people about the numbers. Right? And so I was a teacher for 8 years. And then my kids, one graduated and went off to college and still have one at home, but they don't really like to hang out with me anymore. And so I was like, maybe I should get back into this, water quality stuff that was like so important to me. Because those young people, do they care about the numbers? Sort of actually, a teacher. And I see so many young faces here and I get to work with so many cool people like this young person at the Clark Ford Coalition. I get to hang out with, she's our data manager, like she actually does care about the numbers. So here we go, step one. Step one is the Clean Water Act Section 303B mandates that the Montana Department of Environmental Quality catalog and prioritize impaired waters. So what does it mean to be impaired? Do you have any ideas? Impaired. Polluted, right? So something's happening to make it so we can't fish, swim, earn money by producing food, even cooling a lot of our manufacturing plants, right? These are like all things that we need to use water to live. And so they go through and they're gonna assess the waters. And they're gonna say, is it good or bad? Based on those numbers. And they measure all sorts of things. Nutrients, sediment, habitat, they measure all that kind of stuff. And they say, is it or is it not meeting that beneficial use? Fishable, swimmable is kind of that like terminology that you hear a lot about the Clean Water Act. So then the Department of Environmental Quality says, okay, we have this list of impaired waters that are not meeting these designated uses. And we need to then come up with a way to fix it. So total maximum daily loads. And this is what I was actually trained to do in college. Was do this math exercise to say, okay, we have this landscape, right? We have this watershed, and we're gonna say, okay, what's happening on that landscape that makes the pollutants go into water? And what do we need to do to fix that? And so the Department of Environmental Quality went through and created total maximum daily loads for each of the impaired waters. And it gives us an idea of what we need to do to fix stuff. So that's been accomplished. Now we're on step 3. Community groups use these TMDLs to then ultimately figure out how to fix it. One of the big things that made me switch back to this world of environmental conservation was my students. I had an EPA person come in and speak to my students, and she talked about a bunch of Superfund sites up in the upper Clark Fork and how things are being fixed. And my students said, wait, we can fix stuff? And I said, yeah, we can. Like, we can actually fix stuff. And so ultimately, when we kind of go through this process, and that's why I have all you guys here, right? You guys have the knowledge of each of these little parts. You know, you've been working in these areas, you interact with other people that are landowners in these areas. You know, you're the people that have that knowledge of, okay, yeah, DEQ came up with this list of impaired waters and some ways to fix it. Well, like, now we're like talking about like, okay, we need to prioritize how are we actually going to do that. So ultimately, once we come up with this, and this is where we want to go, right? So we're doing this public outreach, we're getting all of this information, and we'll move on to submitting the plan. Hopefully we can do that in about a year. And once that happens, then the area is available for funding. All right. Any questions on that? So these are our TMDL documents, total maximum daily loads. So that means these are very big documents that are essentially a math exercise to say, how much do we need to reduce those pollutants to attain those designated uses? So the voluntary nutrient reduction program one, it's from 1998. And that's what we're still operating under. So we have a draft, right? So we all know that state and federal funding is this kind of ebb and flow of funding and coming together to like make things actually happen and plan for stuff is sometimes really complicated. And so getting from 1998 to 2025 is really complicated sometimes. Here we have the Silverbow Creek and Clark Fork River Metals TMDL, and this one covers mostly the metals throughout the main stem of the Clark Fork. Where the other one was nutrients, so like phosphorus and think about it's like the vitamins for the river. And nitrogen are like two big ones. And then we have the Bona Superior Metals, and that's more like some tributaries. Flat Creek is probably our most like notable one that is covered within there that runs into Superior. And then we have a water quality improvement plan, again, is more along the tributaries for here. So from that, it's not like we haven't done anything, right? We have the Flint Creek, we have the Rock Creek, the Blackfoot River, Grant Creek, Bitterroot, 9 Mile, and St. Regis is under the process of coming up with one of these watershed restoration plans. And so these plans have been enacted, they are in the process of happening based on these TMDL activities.
A clarifying question.
Yes.
The TMDLs are for a specific pollutant in that water body, like it could be sediment or it could be a heavy metal. They're different sometimes.
Correct.
Further clarifying question. How frequently does that change? I mean, is the extent for like different type of metal or something that comes into play? Like,
Right.
Are all those totally outdated now?
Those are fairly outdated now, and so DEQ continues to assess the waters. So just like how, we're taking nutrient data along the main stem of the Clark Fork, that data, like that draft that I showed, it just hasn't gotten to that point, so it is fairly outdated. But a lot of times that stuff, it's straightforward stuff to kind of get done, but we'll show some examples of how we've moved forward without, a watershed restoration plan in place. So this just shows the extent of the watershed. So here we have Drummond, the main red line that's contiguous all the way to the end. Kind of like the northern area there, that northwest area would be the confluence with the Flathead. This little chunk, the little narrow one is Grant Creek, just to kind of give you guys some perspective. Missoula's right in the middle there. This big chunk at the bottom is the Bitterroot flowing in, and that one was done in 2020. The Blackfoot comes in here, and so the 9 Mile is that little piece there. And St. Regis coming down off the mountains right there. And so those were those WRPs or watershed restoration plans that have already been accomplished. Kind of just you'll see this map again and again and again. Because it's kind of like, all right, this is what we're looking at, and this is where we need to go. All right, so like Brian mentioned in the very beginning, this process was started in 2017. Spent 3 years of working on this. 16 government agencies, 11 watershed groups, 12 nonprofits, businesses and trade associations, educational institutions, student groups. A lot of different people coming together to do the hard work. That's how we're, as far along as we are even to this date. From that, 9 water bodies were really prioritized. So Albert, Deer, Fish, Flat, Grant, O'Keefe, Petty, and then the Smurfit Stone Mill area and Trout Creek.
And the main stem itself.
and the main stem itself. Oh, okay. All right, so this just kind of looks at, so those pollutants, that clarifying question. So those total maximum daily load assessments covered nutrients, so that phosphorus and nitrogen, sediments. And so this is that kind of stuff that varies that substrate, makes it so that if nutrients move more to metals, or a lot of like our Superfund site from mining, temperature, reduction of a lot of our vegetation, a lot of stuff comes into temperature. We'll get into, you know, the pollutants and how to kind of fix them in a minute. And then we have these like non-pollutants. And so this is chlorophyll A. These are kind of more like response things. Low flow alterations, dewatering, riparian vegetation, and the substrate habitat. So our color coding is we have water quality sufficient for all designated uses. So if you see little blue ones, those are like the ones that they actually measured and said they're good. Then we have this like aqua one. Sorry, I'm always bad with color. I shouldn't use it. I'm sorry for anybody who's color impaired with eyesight. Anyway, so data indicates some but not all uses are supported. For this number 2, or this aqua one. 3 is insufficient data. Info makes to like really come up with, you know, if it is supporting or not supporting. And so our red and our orange are the ones that we really kind of need to keep an eye on. So that's the ones that we said they've assessed it. They said it was polluted, and they've come up with a plan to fix it. Or at least like an outline for how we should go about fixing it. And then impaired by non-pollutants, those are more this like chlorophyll A, these like response variables. So we don't have a TMDL, but we know they're impaired. Yes.
For like that, those red areas, is there, and you said you might answer this later, so sorry if you can push me off. Is there like a trend or like a common theme through what that impairment is throughout the watershed, or is it kind of like specific to watershed, to a smaller unit?
Yes, so a lot of the main stem red is due to the metals. But it also has the other ones in it too. And then the tributaries, some of them are more metals, but also with the temperature and the nutrients.
And it could be more than one.
And it can be more than one. Most of them are more than one. You know, when things go bad, it always happens. Once the ball's rolling. So non-categorized assessed concerns, this is essentially, in 2020, once those like, we are concerned about these areas, but they haven't been like assessed, by DEQ. So any water quality issue basically that, hasn't been assessed. So these are just kind of the smallest. I think the big area to kind of point out here is that Smurfit Stone area. Alright, so that was all the scary stuff, right? Things are bad, right? This is where like my students, you know, I left them and then like, oh, climate change, oh, you know, like, and they're just like, oh, the world. And so, but, right, we can fix them. And we have. So this is an example, in the Bitterroot, the WRP in 2020. Lost Horse Creek is glorious water body, has fish that we really want to maintain in the upper reaches. It's just wonderful. Has anybody ever been to Lost Stars Creek and seen in that area? Nice. So this is a location where A is pointing down what would be like downstream, the main part of Lost Horse Creek. Like that's where the river is supposed to go. Or the creek. And B is an irrigation diversion. And so this dam here has been built up to divert. So there's a creek that comes from here and ultimately goes through, like crosses. You guys have ever seen that, like where those irrigation ditches will like cross a main stem of a creek or something like that. And so that's what's happening here. And this is looking downstream. Or actually, I think there's the berm. So we're like looking up at the bridge, looking at that berm, and this is just completely dewatered. Completely like disconnecting it from the Bitterroot River. But wait. This is what it looks like now. Right? So this was prioritized in the Bitterroot Watershed Restoration Plan. And essentially what they did is a siphon is basically a pipe that will have the correct hydrology that it can go under and still go into the ditch. And so they don't have to make the berm there anymore. They still get the water to irrigate their fields. And the fish still get the water and connects to the Bitterroot. And we've had success stories just even on the main stem of the Clark Fork, within the central Clark Fork area. So without having a watershed restoration plan, with a lot of super fund money, we have the Milltown Dam removal. Does anybody remember being around before this was removed? Oh yeah. Yeah. So, we, have this glorious area now that has wetlands and habitat, and the creek or the river is allowed to meander through and have area to access that floodplain and all that kind of stuff. So this is a map of Forest Service restoration sites. Each of these little dots and lines correspond to these activities over here. And this is just a list of different activities that can help things out. So an AOP is an aquatic organism passage. It's just like a lot of places where like culverts and such are changed over so that they can be improved so the fish can utilize that area better. It reduces sedimentation quite a bit, and it helps temperature quite a bit with these types of projects. And so, yeah, 316 AOPs were put in within this area. And so a lot of work has been done within this area, within the watershed.
And that's just Forest Service.
And that was just
On
Forest
Forest
Service.
Service.
Yep, on Forest Service land. It was with a lot of different partners, Trout Unlimited and a lot of different partners came together to get a lot of those. FWP was a huge player in many of those projects. So here's another one, Cedar Creek. Cedar Creek is in Mineral County. On one of our hubs here. And it's a cold water fisheries. And this is a road that was coming right through. And so this kind of just gives you a visual look at what like those projects were. So essentially, we have a road here. It's armored with a bunch of rock riprap to kind of protect the road because we want to protect those investments and not like let all that sedimentation erode into the creek there. But here, TU and partners for the Forest Service removed the road, graded it back down, put a lot more wood in here. and allowed this area to now access the floodplain, have the roughness to slow it down, and allow for nutrients to be, kind of captured within those areas. So these are our success stories, right? This is like, we can fix stuff. Let's keep going with it. Let's find new places. Let's prioritize new places and keep going on it. These are our projects that, the triangles are funded by DEQ 319. And the circles are future fisheries, so that's through, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. And this slide is really just to kind of point out that without that, watershed restoration plan, some of these projects are not as, fundable within this area. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna switch over to Chloe. She's been doing so much work on this. She's super knowledgeable and it's so fun to be working with her.
Okay, hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Chloe. As I was kind of introduced earlier, I'm a master's student at the University of Montana. My thesis research is related to WRPs, specifically how and why they are used in Western Montana and what they can do for watershed conservation in the communities that live within the watersheds. And that is how I got this opportunity to work with the Clark Coalition on the Central Park Forest WRP. So I'm super excited to be here. So Park Fork Coalition, we and I, through the 2025 drafting round, we looked at many different documents, publications, plans, spoke with different partners, etc., and distilled some of this down to make things that could be considered for inclusion in this 2025 WRP. As we go through these considerations, if any of these considerations set off any ideas in your head, please feel free to jot them down and we'd love to hear what you're thinking. So first we have, these are this is FWP's dewatered streams. These are the ones that are in our planning area. Some of these are naturally dewatered just due to hydrogeology, but some of them are certainly dewatered due to overuse, drought, those types of pressures. Specifically, I'd like to draw your attention on the eastern end near Drummond. The main stem itself is actually considered chronically dewatered. When we think back to, especially this last summer, you can think of like low stream flows, hot water, those crazy algae blooms, a snowpack that completely melted off in May. Just something to think about. And it also, when we think about dewatered beaches, considering that there are some major changes in water rights that are happening right now too, just upstream of Missoula, on the Blackfoot and on the Clark Fork. Next, thinking about the restoration of wetlands, floodplains, and riparian areas. Just to clarify on this map, wetland mapping is based on hydric soils. So if you're like seeing some of this and you're like, that doesn't look like a wetland in real life, that is why that is. But if we're talking about pollution, especially nutrient pollution and diminished stream flows, we have to talk about floodplains, wetlands, and riparian areas. These are nature's sponges. They take up this, especially nutrient pollution, and they also release water back into the system at low flows. And then on the flip side, when we dewater wetlands, these act as sources of nutrient pollution, dumping their nutrients back into the river and causing problems downstream. And then the thing I'd like to point out here, those are the county lines in black. Missoula County's in the middle. Just wide floodplains on the main stem there. And then there's also the Smurfit Stone Mill, and big changes in the populations of these communities are happening. Okay, moving on, kind of along the same vein, we have beaver restoration opportunities. I pulled this from the BRAT model. It's the Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool. Restoration or conservation opportunities for beavers. They show on this map, there's easy projects, there's straightforward projects, and then there's more strategic projects that have long-term return, but maybe require more upfront funding or planning. But talking about wetlands and restoration and dewatering and all that stuff, it's good to mention beavers, who are the original low-tech wetland builders. And then this is the Montana Drought Management Plan from the DNRC. This plan has some large landscape scale management measures to think about. Potentially, this could when we're trying to diversify our funding, this might be worth looking into as well. But again, floodplain, wetland, and riparian restorations, restoring stream flows, and other management measures will all work towards building drought resilience. And then moving on to cold water fisheries. This map is a little bit confusing, so I apologize, but the gray line that kind of demarcates the lower left is the Idaho border, and the Central Park Port Planning area is more or less in this. But this is FWP's map for the abundance of West Slope cutthroat trout. The red means that the cutthroat are abundant, the orange means they're common, and the yellow means rare. And then this is the same map for bull trout, more rare for sure than the cutthroat. But we know that these species are really sensitive to temperature, and so prioritizing cold water streams is an important consideration for the health of our native fisheries. Okay, kind of pivoting here, moving on to land ownership. As you can see, as we move to the east towards Drummond, we get a lot more private. And as we move to the west towards Mineral County, we have a lot more public lands. But, in both throughout the whole map, if you follow the trend of the private land, what does it always follow? Follows the Clarkport River mainstem. It's in the valley. So just with so much private land along the mainstem, when we talk about trying to restore the mainstem, we have to consider our relationships with private landowners, the relationships that our partners have with private landowners. All of those are going to be really important within this WRP. And then following kind of like the ownership theme, land use and zoning changes. So on the top left, we have kind of the Allerton to Superior zoning map. And then on the bottom right, we have the zoning map for parts of Missoula County. And some of the green represents agricultural and working land. Some of the darkest green is open space on the Missoula County map. But we just wanted to point out, for example, the why of a place where there will be some major changes happening in the future. A lot more people living there and thinking about our other considerations that we're going to talk about, like floodplain restorations. And then finally, we want to talk about multi-benefit water quality projects. Water quality is a proxy for many other environmental issues. So this is a great space to think expansively and be flexible and be creative. And so I thought this was a fun example of combining water quality into other environmental issues. This is the Center for Landscape Connectivity's map diagram of the 6 mile I-90 wildlife fish passage. So they took a corridor that has high interactions between vehicles and wildlife, and also represents fish passage issues, and it kind of fixes both. There's a safe corridor for wildlife to pass through. It's safer for drivers to drive over, and also it considers the fish and their migration patterns. Okay, so too many notes. Okay. Okay, so we've been thinking more expansively. Now we're going to kind of narrow it down. And this is where our thinking caps can really go on. Just a note for logistics. We organize this by HUC 10s. That's what all those black lines are. A HUC 10 is just a way of organizing watersheds. And we also start upstream. So we start upstream near Drummond. That HUC 10 is called Bear Creek HUC 10, even though Bear Creek isn't on the list. I know it might be confusing, but so within the Bear Creek HUC 10, we took all of the information that we had available to us. So TMDLs, other documents from other land management agencies, etc. And this is where we got. We know that Rattler Peak, Mulkey, and 10 Mile Creeks have impairments like sedimentation and phosphorus. And those are the actual percentages prescribed by the TMDL of what would need to be reduced to meet the water quality standard. But we also know there are other issues such as there's altered riparian vegetative covers, which just means that the riparian vegetation has been altered or removed, stream banks are maybe denuded. And substrate habitat alterations, that's just like when sediment goes into a creek, it varies the actual substrate, that the fish can like spawn on, and lands and et cetera. So like potential management for that, and these are no way exhaustive, but it could be like, and they can be simple too, restore riparian habitat, prevent grazing in riparian zones, stabilize stream banks, mitigate roads, that's gonna be a common theme through every hub. Is mitigate roads near riparian areas, as well as silviculture activities. Next up, downstream is Kramer Creek. Clinton is in this puck. There are some TMDLs for Kramer and Wallace. There's some metals up there. There's also sedimentation issues. They also experience hot temperatures in their streams, riparian degradation, and fish connectivity and habitat issues. So potential management measures for those could be things like mitigate roads, improve fish connectivity, and creating a robust riparian habitat zone to reduce stream temperatures. Large woody debris, we'll also throw that out a lot too. LWD is large woody debris for more stream complexity. Perhaps beaver considerations could be in here. And then this is more broad, but proactive land use decisions, preventing residential development in riparian corridors. Next up is rattlesnake. This is our home hub. There are no TMDLs in the Rattlesnake Creek hub, but there are some issues. And this is kind of where some of our outdated information really comes out. There's been a ton of work since 2020 in Rattlesnake Creek, especially by, Trout Unlimited has been up there. But things that were issues in Rattlesnake Creek were things like fish passage and habitats, dams, and diversions. Moving downstream, we have the Mill Creek Hub. There's a lot of stuff going on here. But there's, go ahead.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You say no TMDLs, does that mean they haven't been measured or that there's no concern?
So no TMDLs are only for things that have they've been assessed by the DEQ and found impaired, and they're impaired by pollutants. So you only get a TMDL if you are confirmed to be impaired and it's nutrients, metals, temperature, sedimentation.
Okay.
Everything else doesn't have a TMDL.
Okay.
So there are no TMDLs in this basin, so I can't give you like percentages, for example, that Mill Creek would need to come down in a certain pollutant to meet the standard. But what we do know is that where there's dewatering in here, there's riparian degradation, there's high temperatures, and there's sedimentation. And there's also the Smurfit Stone pulp mill, which we know is a huge concern for communities up and down river.
And there is a TMDL for the main stem of it.
And the entire, in our entire section, our entire planning area, there is a TMDL for the Buckford River. So potential management measures for the Mill Creek area would be things like managing OHV use, which I think is off-highway vehicle, the acronym has and road encroachment in riparian areas, more of that proactive land use management, like thinking back to like the floodplains, density building in Missoula County, et cetera, septic tanks. There were in 2020, and I think now there are beaver considerations, especially Elbear Creek, like areas where beavers could be restored. This is that big floodplain area and wetland area, so floodplain and wetland considerations for drought resilience. In 2020, people were really concerned about how O'Keefe Creek hasn't been assessed by the DEQ, so like more water quality data from O'Keefe Creek, which O'Keefe Creek is not on this map, but it runs through the pulp mill. And then of course, Smurfit Stone. We have Petty Creek. There are TMDLs here for Petty and Westbrook Petty related to temperature, sediments, and phosphorus. There's also been some more recent work done in here in Petty Creek, especially by Trout Unlimited. But the more recent problems that we've been aware about pre-2020 were things like lack of stream complexity, large debris, dewatering, the roads issues, removal of vegetative covers, disconnection from its floodplain. And so those management measures are restore riparian zones and shade, cooperative riparian management plans were suggested, prevent over widening of the channel, more like stream complexity stuff, mitigation of dewatering, mitigation of nutrient sources, especially ag. Down to Fish Creek. Fish Creek is one of the most important wildlife areas in our Central Park Fork. It's a super important fishery. It was a huge concern to the 2020 stakeholders, and I'm assuming it still is. There's no TMDLs in this either, but Fish Creek is impaired. And some of that comes from lack of stream complexity and large woody debris, sedimentation from silviculture and roads. There's definitely been a lot of work done in Fish Creek too, recently, but management measures will be ensuring that there are no fish barriers, ensuring that we have stream complexity, and kind of balancing that with the recreation question. And the roads, minimizing road impacts and stream crossings. And then we actually have a Cache Creek, which comes in to Petty, is actually, I think, the first one we've seen so far going downstream, where we have one that is a water quality category of 1, which means the TEQ has assessed it and considers it to be in good quality. So also like maintaining that. Moving down, we have Trout Creek. There's TMDLs in here, there's Nemo and trout. Those are impaired by phosphorus, temperature, nitrogen as well. And then Trout Creek has a turbidity impairment, which probably comes from woody debris. There's a mill kind of close to the headwaters, or sorry, to the mouth. And then there's also Cedar Creek, which we talked about earlier, super important water fishery, which is also considered impaired, but just not by those pollutants. And things like that we have in there, chronic dewatering, some of which is natural, just from hydrogeology, but certainly from land use as well. There's algae, alteration in the riparian vegetative covers, sedimentation causes those substrate habitat alterations, as well as like mining activities can do that too, and there is some mining happening in there. Those management measures, just like what Trout Unlimited was doing in Cedar Creek, minimizing road impacts, like can they be relocated, can they be decommissioned, narrowed, etc., best management practices, restoration of those buffer zones, reconnection of that floodplain, installation of large woody debris, we love that. Reviewing those inactive mining claims, assessing what's going on there, and is any of that eligible for reclamation? And then enhancing recruitment in any areas that are not native to trout strongholds. Okay, and finally, last one, Dry Creek. So we have TMDLs in here for Hall Gulch and Flat Creek and Dry Creek. Flat Creek and Hall Gulch had massive metals impairments. A lot of work has been done on them though by the DEQ, the Forest Service, and Trout Unlimited. We don't have any updated water quality information on them, so it's hard to say how they're doing, but those 3 have removed huge amounts of mining tailings from the stream beds and done a lot of restoration work. Additionally, there's some sedimentation issues in Flat Creek and some nutrient issues in Dry Creek, as well as alteration in those veg covers, dewatering, substrate habitat alterations. Things that we could do to help enhance recruitment in areas that are not native to trout strongholds, stabilize stream banks, restore riparian vegetation, habitat improvements, channel functions, etc., that kind of stuff. Is there anything you'd like to add, Gretchen?
I don't think it's good. The flyer that's coming around, there's a QR code on there. That kind of leads you through the different huts, the hydrologic unit codes, and allows you to kind of input that information. Especially for those who are in Zoom, I will email that out with the recording. And all of you that are here, I will also do that. And so that might be something you wanna, like, when you go back to your office and have time or something to kind of think on it, might be the place. And so hopefully you can just kind of like look at those priorities that were developed in 2020. A lot of effort went into coming up with those priorities. But yet a lot of work has been done within some of those. And so now here we are 5 years later. What has been done and where can we kind of move forward? So this is really the like on the ground. This is the kickoff, right? Like you guys are the people who we want to pick your brains.
Everybody in Zoom land, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. This recording will be on available on the Clark Coalition YouTube channel and upon request. Thank you.